Okay, when you're setting up your compositions, you can use a viewfinder. It's a helpful tool to create thumbnail sketches. Thumbnail sketches just being a small, quick version where you can work out some of the compositional arrangements that you want to try before you commit to something for your final drawing. All you need to do is use an opening with the same ratio as your final surface, your paper, canvas, whatever it is you're using. You can buy one of these at a store. I've never actually seen them, but I know that they exist where you can change the ratio of each side for whatever it is you're using. But you can also just make one out of paper. You can make it whatever size you want. All you do is just cut out a little square or rectangle or circle or whatever you're using, and then you hold it up to view if you're working from observation, and you can kind of poke around and play with different compositions. It's a little bit easier to see what your final version will look like before you start on your thumbnail sketches. So something to consider. You can also use a camera as a viewfinder. I do this all the time. What's handy about that, right, is then you have a reference image if you're not going to be working from observation. If you're working from a photo, you're taking the photo directly. You can play around with the composition digitally, right? You can play with it. So anyway, we're going to talk about the rule of thirds, which seems fairly familiar to most students in my experience, since most of you have it in your pocket on your cell phone. If it's not on your phone, it's probably just in the settings. So if you want to play around with it, you can turn it on. Rule of thirds, it should be somewhere in your camera settings. And that's basically what we're going to use for your composition. We'll talk about some other things too, but I find this to be the easiest general way to set up your composition. So the rule of thirds is a type of composition in which an image is divided evenly into thirds, both horizontally and vertically, and the subject of the image is placed at the intersection of those dividing lines or along one of the lines itself. And we'll go through a few examples of how you can use the rule of thirds. Not quite as strict as this example here, but to give you an exact example of what the definition is. So using the rule of thirds, if you think about landscape imagery, the land here is taking up about the bottom third, the ocean's taking up the middle third, and the sky being the top third. And then this figure subject is in the cross section, one of these cross sections, right? So the cross sections being here, 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 and here. But we can apply this loosely to other works, right? So if we think about that Kim Dingle image we just looked at, the rule of thirds, the figure is along this bottom third line. It's taking up the majority of this bottom third part of the composition. It is bleeding into the middle a bit, right? It's fairly balanced. And then if we look at the crosshairs of the rule of thirds, we see that knee coming out at us and the chin of this little baby, right? Both focal points of this image. So drawing by tall R, so we can think about this yellow stripe and how it's balanced over the rule of thirds. So these vertical lines here are not part of the image. I added those for you. So it's fairly balanced, right? We have a big gap here in this yellow stripe, and that sort of makes up for it down here. If we put in the cross sections, you can see that the handlebars of these particular figures are about at these thirds lines. And then we can break down this image in terms of some of our other key terms. So if we think about balance, we could split this composition in half vertically. It would be fairly similar on both sides, right? In terms of the pattern of the ground and the amount of figures on each side, the visual weight. The harmony and unity, the internal logic of this painting, overall it's a similar style, right? The pattern being the arrangement of the bikers, the striped colors on the ground. And then variety, the colors in the bikers and the helmet shapes. There's also some stray paint marks on this left side that don't appear on this right side. It's all things to think about when you're setting up your compositions. Okay, so let's look at this David Hockney painting in terms of composition. The foreground closest to the viewer is about the bottom 2/3. Not exactly right, it doesn't line up on that thirds line, but it's fairly close. And the background being the top 1/3. This figure is on the right third. Figures carry visual weight, a measure of the force that an element exerts to attract the eye. Another part of the visual weight of this figure is the red jacket. It's very bright in contrast to the dark green background, complementary colors. So David Hockney is using the rule of thirds in both directions, right? He has the figure on the right third, his figure on the bottom third. Setting an L shape with visual weight, those compositionally implied lines that we talked about. And then there's an implied line from the figure's gaze that creates a triangular composition. Some more compositionally implied lines in this image are the mountains that point down toward the center of the image. They overlap at the horizontal thirds line, right? In the center, the top third line.